Vernon Hall, Chapter 11. At First Sight. In the months that followed Amelia's embalmment, I found myself beset by hallucinations and morbid thoughts. My mind would often plunge into memories of that blood-curdling night. I would see the embalmer draining Amelia's blood into the container. She would resurrect and wail. She was in so much pain, and it was I who was torturing her. I would wake, choking, perspiring, my heart fluttering with terror. I would run down to that insidious dungeon to see Amelia still in her casket. But her expressions changed every few weeks. In the beginning, she seemed sad, but a few months later, it seemed she had a frown on her face. She seemed agitated. Each time I would ask Bertha to verify what I had observed, she only shook her head. "Nothing, miss. She has no expression," she would say solemnly. With each day that passed inside Vernon Hall, I grew a little more monastic. It wasn't healthy physically or mentally. Yet, I had done this to myself. "Oh, I cannot see you like this, miss," Bertha pleaded one morning as she woke me. I had fallen asleep on the drawing room sofa. "Please come out with me, miss. It's a fine day. I hear the birds singing. The sun is shining. Let's go to the shores and see the silver waters," she pleaded. Before I could give Bertha an answer, there was a knock at the main door. "Who can that be?" I was alarmed. "Let me take a look from the peephole, miss. You keep lying down." After quietly tiptoeing to the door and peering through the peephole, she whispered, "It's the pastor's son, miss. What should I do?" I felt uneasy. In truth, I didn't wish to see Gareth. "Tell him I'm asleep, Bertha." Bertha opened the main door and stepped out. I remained on the sofa, but as it was so quiet, I could hear them both. "Is Eleanor at home?" Miss is sleeping, sir. Is there anything I can help you with?" Bertha replied with a giggle. It wasn't a natural giggle. I knew Bertha well by now. She was a sweetheart, and this was a guilty giggle because she had forced herself to lie, a thing she despised doing. "No, ma'am. My father asked me to deliver these fruits to her. If you would be so kind as to give them to her. I hope her health is better now. She was very weak the last time I saw her." But of course, sir, don't you worry. I shall feed these fruits to Miss when she awakens. Don't worry about her health. She is fine now. Oh, and do say thank you to the pastor for me." She giggled again. Bertha shut the main door and walked toward me with the fruit basket. "He's a kind lad, isn't he, miss?" she beamed. "Put it away, Bertha. I'm not in a mood to eat right now." The smile on Bertha's round cherub-like face faded. "What is it, Bertha?" I said melancholically. "Miss, you know you cannot stay in here forever. You have your entire life ahead of you. If a young man takes an interest in you, that means he really likes you." "He probably does, Bertha. He had asked for my hand in marriage, and I refused." Bertha looked aghast. She started to speak, but refrained. "Yes, I know what you're thinking, Bertha, but to answer your question, I don't love him." Bertha was right, however. I was growing weaker and paler each day, and my health was declining. I entered Amelia's bedchamber and opened her wardrobe. All her regal dresses and gowns stared at me. I sat on the bed, crestfallen at the sight of her raiment. Then I opened her dressing table drawer and admired her collection of brooches. I took one made of pearl and wore it in memory of her. I then glanced at her perfume bottles and sprayed some on my clothes. It was the same Arabian fragrance she had worn when I first met her at the church. It seemed so long ago now. I took up Bertha's offer and we went for a stroll on the shore. The wind blew in our faces. By that time it was nearly nightfall, and the luminous moon cast its celestial reflection on the silver sea. The subtle crashing of the waves and distant boats with lanterns produced a serene spectacle. They shone like stars in the night sky. I remembered father and how I would wait for him on the cliffs. I remembered him waving to me from his boat. Oh, it all felt like a dream. All of it. Alas, I had lost everything. Well, I still had Amelia, locked away in that sinister dungeon. I was lost in the quicksands of time when I noticed that Bertha had wandered off in pursuit of a firefly. I quickened my pace to catch up with her. "Bertha, wait!" I shouted. Before I could say anything further, I stumbled over a rock and sprained my ankle. I fell on the sands. I let out a cry, and upon hearing me, sweet old Bertha lifted her dress and hurried to my rescue like a barrel rolling. But before Bertha could reach me, I felt someone else's hands upon my shoulders. "Are you all right?" It was the deep voice of a man, and his grip was firm. I was in so much pain that I didn't turn to see his face. No, not really. I was in tears. This was the first time I had been out in months, and for once I was actually enjoying myself. Everything was peaceful and perfect, but of course something disastrous had to happen. "Don't worry, I'll help you," said the man, and before I could respond, he placed his strong arms under my body and lifted me as though I were but a feather. By this time, Bertha had arrived. "Oh, Miss Eleanor, are you all right?" she cried. The man answered it before I could say a word. "I think she sprained her ankle. She seems to be in pain. Where do you live? I may be able to carry her to your home," he offered. I still couldn't see him clearly, as the moon had been overshadowed by floating clouds, and it was eerily dark. But I could smell a cologne. "Oh, we're from Vernon Hall, sir. Please do help her," Bertha cried. The strong man suddenly paused. For a moment he resembled a statue. "Vernon Hall?" he inquired. "Yes, sir. Oh, sir, the chauffeur has left for the day. There is no man at Vernon Hall who can help Miss Eleanor. Will you be so kind, sir?" Bertha pleaded again. The man pondered over the request momentarily. Then, without reply, strode swiftly up the cliffs, carrying me back to Vernon Hall. Once we arrived, the man carried me straight to the drawing room and placed me gently on the sofa. I was in tears, my eyes closed as I snivelled. The pain in my foot was excruciating, and it travelled all the way to my hip. I was in a slight panic, and I heard Bertha mumbling illogical words, as she often did in states of frenzy, as she ran to the kitchen to fetch water. "Don't cry. I'll help you. The pain will go. You have to trust me," he whispered. I felt a firm, warm hand caress my frozen cheek. I slowly opened my eyes. A face stared back at me that I had never seen before. An exquisitely sculpted, porcelain-like face of a man who I assumed to be about 30. He had chiseled features, symmetrical jawlines, and a goatee. His face was as pale as the moonlight, and his long, silky black hair made him resemble a Viking, or the medieval warriors I had read of in one of the fairy tales Amelia had given me. He had beautiful long eyelashes and pink lips. His sparkling hazel eyes stared at me. "You have nothing to be afraid of, Eleanor," he whispered. I was enthralled. I wondered whether I was dreaming again. I doubted my sanity. But then Bertha dashed into the drawing room with a bowl of water, ice, and some towels, and I realized I wasn't dreaming. Oh my, oh dear, miss, she cried. Calm yourself. The beautiful man lifted his pale, perfectly carved hand to silence Bertha. She grew quiet. He wrapped the ice inside the towel and gently placed it on my ankle. I let out a moan, but a few moments later felt my pain diminish. I looked to him and he fixed his gaze upon me. A gentle smile crept upon his lips, and as I looked deeper into his beautiful hazel eyes, I felt my cheeks burn and I blushed inadvertently. Bertha read between the lines and appeared uncomfortable. She kept mumbling and shifted her glances between me and the mysterious stranger. After a few moments of exchanging romantic glances with the man, he apologized. I'm sorry for staring, Eleanor. It's just that you remind me of someone. That pearl brooch and that Arabian fragrance, they are both familiar. He smiled. I shook my head and spoke, emerging from my trance. You knew Amelia? I spoke hastily. I did years ago. I was her doctor. But I left for Europe and only just recently returned to discover the tragedy that had befallen her. I'm sorry for your loss. He touched my arm gently. I gulped, then spoke again. I couldn't part with her. I had her embalmed, and her casket lies in the dungeon below. The beautiful stranger narrowed his eyes, listening to each of my syllables intently. He fixed his gaze as if he were trying to analyze me. I see, he finally said. Well, I will return in a few days when you're better. Then perhaps you can take me to her. I would like to pay my respects. I was astonished. He wasn't horror stricken at hearing of the embalmment. He was so different from the rest of the townspeople. You mean you don't think what I did was wrong? I asked naively. He held my hand, his fingers gently caressing my skin. Of course not. You seem to love her very much. It is difficult to part with a loved one. I know that. He spoke sentimentally. Bertha then cleared her throat. It's getting late, sir. I would offer you dinner, forgive my rudeness, but I think that Miss ought to rest. She's had quite an exciting evening. Bertha raised her eyebrows. She shot me a glance. I continued to blush. Of course, you're right. I shall take my leave. May I call on you a week from today, Eleanor? I honestly couldn't have said no to. I nodded eagerly. Excellent. I bid you ladies farewell for now. He looked at Bertha, then again at me. Take care of yourself. He winked. As he stood, I beheld his stature for the first time. He towered over me, a Greek statue of Apollo. He was at least 6 feet tall. He tossed his long, silky hair and walked to the main door. He had a slim physique and wore a long coat. As Bertha opened the door for him, he looked over his shoulder and smiled at me. I was flushed, but I exclaimed, "Oh, wait, what is your name?" The beautiful man blinked his eyes several times, raised his eyebrows, then said dreamily, "Ezekiel Lloyd, at your service, my lady." He bowed and left. I, however, was left in a state of paralysis. Not from the sprain in my ankle, no, but a paralysis of the heart.